this coming Thursday, February 11th, Armenians all over the world would observe or will commemorate the Battle of Avarai, which was fought in the year 451 AD. The Armenians went to war against the Persians in that year in order to preserve their Christian faith and Armenian culture and identity. This shows how dear Christianity has been to every Armenian. Instead of renouncing Christianity and accepting the Persian demand to reconvert to Zoroastrianism, the Armenians stood fast in their loyalty to Jesus Christ. Well, by the end of my message this morning, you will find why this date, 451 AD, has been such a pivotal date in our national history. There were certain events that paved the way for this war. Wars don't happen in a vacuum. We know that. It was unfortunate that there were two rival empires bordering Armenia at the time. And these two mighty empires were Byzantium and Persia. Byzantium lay to the east of Armenia and Persia to the south of Armenia. And these two empires were rivals, and they were locked in constant conflicts for a long period of time, approaching 1,000 years. There were always fights and border skirmishes between the Byzantines and the Persians. And Armenia suffered as a result of that rivalry. And this rivalry between these two mighty empires that controlled all of the Middle East, Asia Minor, and the Mediterranean world reached its peak in the year 387 AD. At that time, Byzantium and Persia partitioned Armenia among themselves. Western Armenia fell under the dominion of Byzantium, and Eastern Armenia came under the control of Persia. So Armenia was partitioned into two sections, and the Armenians who lived in Western Armenia lost contact with their kinsmen in Eastern Armenia. The only unifying factor that brought the Armenians together was religion, the Christian religion and the Armenian language and the Armenian culture. So although Western Armenians were separated from Eastern Armenians, the bond of religion and culture and language bridged that gap and kept the Armenian nation united. The Armenians walked a tightrope by trying to maintain good relations with both Byzantium and Persia. They didn't want to alienate any one of these mighty powers because they knew that Armenia could not go to war against any one of these mighty powers. The Armenians were outnumbered by both the Byzantines and the Persians. And they didn't have the resources that these two world powers possessed. Everything went well as long as the Iranian royal family consisted of Parthians. The Arshakuni kings of Armenia were also mostly Parthian. And they had established marital ties with the Parthian kings of Persia. And so the Parthian kings of Persia always had amicable relations with the Armenians during the Arshakuni dynasty period. And it was during this time, the Arshakuni period, that the Armenians paid very low taxes to Persia, and they had the most internal autonomy. The Parthians were closely related to the Armenians and to the ancient Persians, because the Parthians belonged to the Aryan branch of the Indo-European family of nations. The Armenians also belong to the Indo-European family of nations, and they belong to the Aryan branch of the Indo-European family of nations. So the Armenians and the Parthians were ethnically very close. And the Persians also belonged to the Aryan branch of the Indo-European family of nations. Ancient Persian is very close to Armenian. I can give you several examples. Like the Persian word for bell is zan. And what's its Armenian equivalent? Zankag. You notice zankag and zank are very close. The Armenian word for cheese is panir. The Persian is the same thing, panir. The Armenian word for a cow is gov, and the Persian word for cow is gov. Same thing. The Armenian word for free is azad. The Persian word is the same, azad. The Armenian word for a ship is nav. The Persian word is also the same. The Armenian word for brave soldier is sebu. The Persian is sepah. The Persian word for ants is merchun. Sorry, the Armenian is merchun. The Persian is murche. The Armenian word for physician is pezhishk. The Persian is pezesh. And I can go on and on. So ancient Persian and classical Armenian were very close, and classical Armenian and the Parthian were very close. So we were close to the Parthians linguistically and ethnically. Eventually, 30% of the Parthians were absorbed into the Armenian nation, and the 70% of the Parthians were absorbed into the Persian nation and became Persian in due time. So, as long as Armenia was ruled by the Arshakuni kings, relations between Armenia and Persia were very friendly. Why? Because the Arshakuni kings were Parthians, and those who ruled Persia were Parthians, and then there were marital ties between the two dynasties. But then, in Persia, a revolution took place. The Persian Sassanid dynasty overthrew the Parthians and took full control of Persia. Now, the Sassanid Persians were fanatical Zoroastrians, and they believed that to strengthen their empire and to have the upper hand against their rival Byzantium, they must have a unified population. And they decided the only way to achieve cohesion among the various nations that lived under Persian rule was to force them to embrace one religion, and that was the religion of the king, Zoroastrianism. Once the Sassanids came to Persia, they started harboring ill feelings toward the Armenians. They were suspicious of the Armenians' loyalty to the Persian throne. And so, war between the Persians and the Armenians seemed to be inevitable. Yazdegerd II, who belonged to the Sassanid Persian dynasty, sent out an ultimatum to the Armenians. The ultimatum had several points, but the main points zeroed in on the religion. In this ultimatum, King Yazdegerd II of Persia demanded, first, that the Armenians renounce their Christian religion. Second, reconvert and embrace Zoroastrianism. Third, sever all ties with Christian Byzantium. Have nothing to do. No trade, no cultural ties with Byzantium. The Armenians, when they received this ultimatum, they convened a general assembly at the town of Ardashat, which was the capital of Armenia at that time. It's near Echmiadzin, not too far from Echmiadzin. 17 Armenian Nakharars. The Nakharars were provincial governors. They were also noble princes. So every province of Armenia was governed by a Nakharar, who was a mini-king, kind of a mini-king. Each Nakharar had his own army, his own bodyguards, and he was responsible over the region under his control. So 17 Armenian Nakharars, who were princes and provincial governors, met in Ardashat with 17 Armenian religious leaders. They studied the ultimatum sent to them by the Persians, and they had to draft a response to it. After a long discussion and prayer, they made a unanimous decision, and that was to reject the demands of the Persian king Yazdegerd II. In their response to the Persians, they quoted from Romans chapter 8, verses 35 to 40, that Brother Peter read for us this morning. They said, "From this Christian faith nothing can move us, neither angels nor demons, neither powers nor principalities, neither the sword nor the fire, neither things present nor things to come. Nothing can separate us from the love of Christ." So this was the unified response of the Armenian nobility and the Armenian clergy. The Persians had an ambassador in Armenia. His name was Tenshabu. He tried his best to convince the Armenian political and religious leaders to accede to the demands of the Persian king. He tried to tell them that the demands of the Persian king were logical, and that the Armenians should accept all the demands of the Persian monarch. An Armenian clergyman named Revont Yeretz confronted him, and he said, "You don't know what Christianity means to us. Christianity has been interwoven with our culture and national identity. You don't know the joy and the peace that Christ has given us. You don't know the second birth experience that we've gained through Jesus Christ. And our Lord says if we deny him on earth, we will lose the eternal salvation of our souls, because he'll deny us in heaven." So Tenshabu was amazed at how intensely the Armenians were defending their Christian faith, because he believed, since the Armenians accepted Christianity in 301 AD, Christianity was a new religion to them. That's what he thought. This was in 451. So if the Armenians became Christians in 301 AD and declared Christianity to be their state religion, and by doing so they became the first nation in the world to declare Christianity their state religion. Rome came second. when Constantine the Great stopped persecuting the Christians and issued the Edict of Milan, recognizing Christianity as the official religion of the Roman state. That happened in 313. We preceded them by 12 years. So that's a great honor for the Armenians, and to this day are very proud of it. But we should not only be proud that we were the first nation to make Christianity our state religion, we should also be known as the world's best Christians, as the most loyal Christians to Jesus Christ. Now, the Battle of Avarar was, of course, lopsided. The odds were stacked against the Armenians. 66,000 Armenian volunteers under the command of General Vartanantz faced a Persian army that consists of 300,000 soldiers, fully armed, well-trained soldiers. Not only that, the Persian army was fortified by 200 elephants imported from India. The Armenian volunteer army had no such weapons, had no elephants. So the Persians had the upper hand, they had the advantage. And it's interesting that the Armenians held their ground when the war started on May 26, 451 AD. The Persians invaded the Persian army invaded Armenia. And they clashed on the plain of Avarar near the Mud River, which is one of the tributaries of the Arax River. The Armenians held their defensive positions, and all day long they were able to repel the Persian invaders. But then, before sundown, the Armenians decided to cross the Mud River and attack the central division of the Persian army. And that was a tactical mistake. That was when General Vartanantz was martyred, was killed. In those days, if the commander of army died, then the army had to surrender to the enemy. And that meant the end of the war. When the Armenian army commander, General Vartanantz was martyred, along with 1,036 of his brave soldiers, the Armenians did not surrender. They withdrew to their mountain strongholds and continued to fight against the Persians for 33 long years. Vahan Mamigonian, who was the nephew of Vartan Mamigonian, took over the command of the Armenian army and waged a guerrilla-type warfare against the Persians. The Armenians kept harassing the Persian invaders throughout Armenia for 33 long years. And then in the year 484, the Persian monarch called Firuz, who succeeded Yazdegerd II, signed the Treaty of Nabarsag with Vahan Mamigonian. And what did the Treaty of Nabarsag say? The Persians agreed to grant the Armenians full religious and cultural freedom. So the Persians finally said to the Armenians, worship whoever you want. Choose your own religion. Retain your own culture. They stopped forcing us to renounce Christianity and embrace Zoroastrianism. You see, that's why the year 451 is so important in our national history. The War of Avarar, or the Battle of Avarar, was not waged for national liberation. The Armenians did not fight to establish an independent Armenia. In fact, they told the Persian ambassador, we will remain loyal subjects of the Persian king and will continue to pay our taxes to the Persian treasury, but we cannot renounce our Christian faith. So Anzarni said, give us religious freedom and we'll we'll stay with you. We'll remain your subjects, we'll pay taxes, but don't force us to renounce Christianity. This shows how dear Christianity was to them. And world historians today are amazed at this. They say, how is it that after adopting Christianity, 150 years later, Armenians were ready and willing to fight and die for their new Christian religion? That's not a long time. Between 301 AD, 451 AD, that's just 150 years, a span of 150 years. So within 150 years, Armenians were entrenched in their Christian beliefs, and they're willing to fight for their Christian faith and die for it. Well, there were several factors that contributed to this. First, Saint Mesrop Mashtos, who invented the Armenian alphabet, established Christian schools throughout Armenia, where young people were immersed in religious instruction. Saint Mesrop was supported in his effort by the Catholicos of the day, Sahak Bartev. So we had not only Saint Gregory the Illuminator, who converted us to Christianity, was a Parthian, but one of our most famous Catholicos, Sahak Bartev, was a Parthian. So Saint Mesrop Mashtos had the full support of the Catholicos Sahak Bartev, and he had the full support of the Armenian king Bramshaw. Saint Mesrop Mashtos assembled around him a group of expert Armenian translators. His students were linguists and had full knowledge of classical Armenian, Persian, Greek, Hebrew, and Assyrian languages. So they started translating the Bible into Armenian. The whole Bible was translated into Armenian after the invention of the Armenian alphabet. In fact, when the Armenian alphabet was invented, the first thing the Armenians did was translate the whole Bible into Armenian. And you know which verse of the Bible that's translated first? The opening verse of the book of Proverbs. The Armenian, classical Armenian says, Gamachel zimastitun yabischarat imaralas panan manjaro, which means understanding the words of wisdom, paying attention to the words of wisdom. They realized that the Bible contained divine wisdom, and getting acquainted with divine wisdom was the first duty of man. In Jerusalem, the Armenian community school is called Sirkos Armanchats, Holy Translators. And on the central wall of the main school hall was this verse inscribed. Janachel zimastutunya v'sferat, Imanal Spanan Panjaro. Janachel and Imanal have the same meaning, means to know. To know, knowledge, is to know the word of God. And then the Armenians translated not only the Bible, they translated all the theological books written by Christian theologians during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. They translated the Confessions of St. Augustine. They translated everything Clement of Alexandria had written. They translated the sermons of the Greek Christian preacher Chrysostom. So they translated the works of Polycarp, who was a Christian martyr. He was martyred by the Romans during the 2nd century. He was the Bishop of Smyrna, and he was martyred for his Christian faith in the 2nd century. So the Armenians had translated also the works of the Greek philosophers, Greek and Roman philosophers. And all these translations produced the Armenian Golden Age. The 4th century is the golden age of Armenian literature. So the Armenians were well versed in the Bible during those 150 years, and they became acquainted with Christian theology. They knew the writings of the famous Christian theologians of the time, and so they had a full grasp of what it meant to be a Christian. So this was the second factor, the translation of the Bible into Armenian. And the third, there was a clergyman who was a student of Saint Mesrop Mashtots. His name is Yeznik Gohpatsi. This fellow wrote a book titled The Refutation of the Sects. In Armenian, Yerns Avantos. So he, in his book, The Refutation of the Sects, discusses the contradictions of all the pagan religions. He starts with Zoroastrianism, goes to Mithraism, and ends with the Roman emperor worship. And he shows how all these pagan religions have inconsistencies and contradictions, and how Christianity is superior to all the pagan religions in ethical and moral values. This book was well read, well distributed among the Armenians. So this was another reason why the Armenians refused to renounce their Christian faith. They had studied and read the book of Yezdik Gohpatsi, The Refutation of the Sects, and they knew that Christianity was superior to all other pagan religions. So, I want to say, before I close, that the Battle of Avarar was not a one-day-long battle as some assume. It was a long war that lasted 33 years and ended with the Treaty of Navarsak that favored the Armenians. The Persians were defeated, I believe, because they were unable to achieve their main objective. What was the Persians' main objective? To convert the Armenians into Zoroastrianism. They failed very miserably in that. And finally, in the year 484, they told the Armenians, we grant you full religious freedom. When I arrived in Iran, in Tehran, Iran, early in 1960, I wanted to visit the Armenian institutions to get more acquainted with the Armenian community and their institutions. So I decided to find out the main Armenian cathedral in Tehran. Got the address from the phone book. There was no GPS at the time. And the maps in Iran were not that trustworthy. Anyway, I tried to locate this Armenian cathedral, which was dubbed as the largest cathedral the largest Christian cathedral in Iran. And the Armenian community in Iran was the largest Christian community. The second largest Christian community in Iran were the Assyrians, but the Armenians were much larger in numbers. So I found the street, but I couldn't find the church. I couldn't see the church steeple. When in my search, I came across a Zoroastrian temple. It was well identified as a Zoroastrian temple. It had the symbol of Ahura Mazda, who was the main Zoroastrian god. It was a weekday, and so the temple was closed. There were no services there, but the custodian was sweeping the courtyard of the temple. I approached him, and with my broken Persian, I asked him where the Armenian church was. Oh, he said, the Armenians are our brothers. Their church is one block further north. Continue north on the same street. And across the street from us, you'll see the Armenian church. By the way, we love the Armenians. So I was amazed that in 451, the Persians were our enemy. We fought against them. We fought a heroic battle against them. And in the mid-1960s, a Zoroastrian Persian was telling the grandson of a Armenian genocide survivor, where the Armenian church was located, and he expressed his admiration for the Armenians. He said, the Armenians are our brothers. We were enemies, now we're brothers. The irony of all of this is that when the Arab tribes who were disunited became one entity under the banner of the Islamic religion, they sent an ultimatum to the Persian king, whose name was Yazdiget III. They told him, convert to Islam or get ready for war. The Persians refused to surrender to Islam, and so their country was invaded by the Arab Muslims. A pitched battle took place at a place called Nahavand in Iran, and the Persians were defeated. The Arab Muslim armies became victorious, and then they gave the Persians an ultimatum. In 451, the Persians gave us an ultimatum. But in the 7th century, the Arab Muslims gave the defeated Persians an ultimatum. Number one, convert to Islam. If you refuse, if you want to stay Zoroastrian, number two, you have to pay the jizya, which was a tax levied on non-Muslims for the privilege of living in a Muslim-dominated country. Third, if you don't want to pay the jizya, you have to leave the country. And 500,000 Persian Zoroastrians who didn't want to renounce Zoroastrianism and didn't want to embrace Islam left Iran for India. And to this day, there's a large Persian community in India. They're known as Parsis. The Parsis are the Zoroastrian Persians. And their most illustrious member was Zebud Mihta, who was a classical music conductor. He's world famous, by the way. And those Zoroastrians who remained in Iran and didn't convert had to pay the annual tax, the jizya. So what happened? The majority of the Persians paid the jizya. The majority of the Iranians didn't want to pay taxes. They converted to Islam. And today, Iran is a Muslim majority country. 95% of the people who live in Iran are Muslims. Shiite Muslims, but they're Muslims. Had we, in 451, acceded to the Persian demand and converted to Zoroastrianism, maybe we too also would have become Muslims. Because the Arab Muslims, after conquering Iran, they invaded Armenia. And they conquered Armenia. They destroyed the Vartanantz church, which was the most beautiful church in Armenia. The ruins of Vartanantz are near Echmiadzin, or the way to the airport. They killed all the members of the Mamegonian dynasty because they knew the Mamegonians were the military genius. And they imposed a tax on Armenia, the jizya tax. The Armenians paid the jizya tax. The Persians refused to pay the jizya tax. They converted instead. The Armenians paid the tax and refused to convert to Islam. Then in the 10th century, an Armenian national liberation movement led by Sasunsi Tavit drove the Arab Muslims out of Armenia, and Armenia regained their independence. So the Battle of Abarai is very important because Zoroastrian, who fought against the Ottoman Turks, got his inspiration from the heroes of Vartanantz. Vartanantz. And I remember when I was a school kid and attending kindergarten at the Armenian community school, we had always recited a poem on the day of Vartanantz. I'm an Armenian, I am brave, I am the grandson of Vartan, something like that. So Vartan Mamigonian and his comrades who fought in defense of Christianity and got martyred for their love for Christ continue to inspire generations of Armenians even today. Well, whenever the Battle of Abarai is commemorated by Armenians throughout the world, the focus is, of course, placed on Vartan Mamigonian. And that's the right thing to do. He was the star of that day. But we also forget a heroine, a female, a woman who also was instrumental in keeping us Christian. This woman's name is Shushanik. I don't know if you've heard of her. Shushanik was the elder daughter of General Vartan Mamigonian. And she was the granddaughter of Kathebikos Sahat. She was married to a Georgian feudal prince called Varsken, not Vasken, Varsken, who ruled over a region of Georgia called Tsugai. After the Battle of Abarai, this fellow, who was an opportunist, visited the Persian monarch and renounced his Christian faith, converted to Zoroastrianism, and he was awarded by the Persian king with many favors. And when he returned to Georgia, he started putting pressure on his wife to convert to Zoroastrianism. But Shushanik was a devout Christian. She was a woman who read the Bible every day, who prayed every day. When she got married, her grandfather, the Catholicos, as a gift, gave her a copy of the Gospel of Matthew, which he had reproduced with his own handwriting on the scroll. So she always read the Gospel of Matthew and was very firm in her beliefs. She refused to convert. She refused to obey her husband. So he punished her. He punished her by imprisoning her at his castle, where she was tortured for 7 years. He ordered the guardsmen to give her very little food. The only food she got every day was a portion of dry bread, which was stale, and some water. A Georgian priest by the name of Father Jacob was the only clergyman who was allowed to visit her periodically. And this Georgian clergyman visited her once a month and administered the sacrament of communion to her. She finally died in the year 484. And when she died, she was just a bag of skeleton. She weighed 60 pounds at the time of her death. And this Georgian priest, after her death, wrote a book, The Life and Faith of Shushanik. He wrote it in Georgian. And it's the oldest extant Georgian literary work in existence today. In 1868, Father Jacob's book, The Life of Shushanik, The Life and Faith of Shushanik, was translated into Russian, German, Italian, French, Hungarian, and Icelandic. It's amazing. And the Georgian Orthodox Church recognizes Shushanik as a saint. She's a canonized saint in Georgia. And every year on October 26, or October 16, not 26, October 6th, Throughout Georgia, they celebrate her life and honor her for her strong Christian faith. And the Armenian Apostolic Church has canonized her too. She's a saint in the Armenian Apostolic Church. And her name's day is celebrated every year between September 20 and September 26. So, yes, at the Battle of Avarar, we had male heroes, male warriors, General Vartanantz and 1,036 of his warriors who died for the sake of Christ. But we also had a heroine, Shushani. She's not called Saint Shushani. In the Armenian Apostolic Church, she is known as Saint Shushani. So we have good examples to emulate. We have to emulate the example of Vartanantz and his brave comrades, and we have the example left to us by Saint Shushani, who endured intense persecution and suffering, but remained true and loyal to a Christian faith. The best way we can honor our national heroes is to remain true and loyal to our Christian faith and retain our Armenian national and cultural identity. Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the faith of our ancestors that resisted the powers of evil, survived fiery persecutions, trials, untold suffering, and even death, and was passed on to us as a precious heritage. We realize that our strength comes from you. Help us to use the sword of the Spirit, the Bible, as an effective weapon to defeat and overcome the powers of evil and darkness. Help us to be decent and true in everything that we do, and uphold your truth as a witness to the world. May we rejoice in the blessed hope of everlasting life, be patient in tribulation, and remain constant in our prayer life, and overcome evil with good, through Jesus Christ our Lord, in whose name we pray. Amen.